Welcome to Comic Crackle. I'm your host, Christmas Kirby. So, I have a hot take. 2020 sucked. I know it might be a little bit controversial. I know that everybody enjoyed the COVID-19 experience. You know, the political instability and the fear of gathering so you couldn't be with the people that you love during the holidays. But me? Not a fan. In all seriousness, it wasn't a good time for anyone. Just for the comics industry, a lot of publishers implemented pencils down, which basically meant that creators couldn't work on the books that were making them money. There was a complete stoppage on producing new comics. Creators went months without being able to maintain steady work, and a constant wondering if and when the comics industry would bounce back. During this time, I took advantage of the void of new works and decided to go back and read a bunch of seminal works that I had been told to read many times before, but just never had the time. As a reader, I became more and more invested in the creators and behind the scenes on the process. Luckily for me, a lot of these creators that I grew to love had ample time to talk about their experiences as well as their unique takes on creating books. I was a dedicated listener to the Word Balloon podcast, which had the host, John Suntress, interview everyone from Brian Michael Bendis to Ram V. Even creators I was previously unfamiliar with their work. I would be fascinated about their unique voices and the diversity within the industry. One of the interviews that I remember vividly is the one with Ed Brubaker. This one kind of caught me off guard because a lot of the other creators would talk about the books that were coming out previously and how they worked in their own unique way, but Brubaker was talking about a book that was just about to come out, and it wasn't from a standard publisher. Instead of releasing a creator-owned through Image or Dark Horse, they were releasing it online through a website called Panel Syndicate. And not only was it a new book, but it was also pay what you want. So long story short, this book has interested me for so long, but for some reason I never read it. And considering it's a book that takes place during Christmas, I figured I might as well cover it for my Christmas episode. So that's what I'm doing. But before we get into that, let's hear a word from our sponsor. Do you want to read comics outside of the norm of superheroes, but don't really know where to start? Well, I have the perfect service for you. Global Comics is a comic app that allows you to read over 70,000 comics from 350 different publishers. The majority of the creator-owned books that I talk about are now at your fingertips. And they just signed a partnership with DC Comics, allowing for them to host DC books on the app. So really, it's a one-stop shop for everything that you want to read for comics. I think the greatest part about Global Comics is the fact that creators are given royalties based on what you read. So out of your subscription cost, they get up to 70% in royalties. With new issues published daily and more publishers coming on board, this is your time to expand your comic palette. So go to the link in the description or on the app, use my code COMICCRACKLE at checkout and get your first year for $59.99. Thanks to Global Comics for sponsoring this episode, and now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Before we jump into the story, we need to talk. Don't worry, I'm not breaking up with you. I just wanted to talk about Panel Syndicate. In 2013, Marcos Martin, Munsta Vicente, and my second favorite bald Brian that's a comics writer from Cleveland, Brian K. Vaughan, all came together to form their own publishing and distribution service named Panel Syndicate. It was originally formed to circumvent the publication process and get their work directly to the audience. The first series that was published and distributed by Panel Syndicate was The Private Eye, which earned them an Eisner Award and a Harvey Award. Yeah, I know that webcomics have been around before 2013, so on its face, it doesn't feel like an ambitious concept. But the interesting part is how it's distributed. The publisher's website enforces the slogan of pay what you want. So for an entire series, you pay for what you think the book book is worth. This bypasses the publication cost and focuses on catering to every single reader. I've taken to Twitter multiple times to ask what people typically lean towards for reading comics, with the majority usually saying that it's pirating sites. When diving into questions as to why, the typical responses cite one of the following: the cost for physical comics and digital comics being the same amount, not enough room to store physical copies of comics, limited accessibility, or just the prices being too damn high, which I get it. And Panel Syndicate does too. Marcos Martin elaborates on the creation of Panel Syndicate by stating, "I've always felt that mainstream comics needed to find a bigger audience and lower the product price, which is the opposite of what's been happening for years now. Basically to recapture the original concept of comic books as a popular product of entertainment, but do it in a way which the creators are the main figure of the business model. For the first time, technology allows us to do just that, and I was hopeful that through digital distribution, we'd be able to bring in more readers to traditional print comics. Really, they're meeting the audience where they are, offering books and accepting any amount in return." What stood out for me is that Brubaker referred to the pay what you want method as leaving a tip for the creator. He said that the majority of the readers of Panel Syndicate are ones that have a further appreciation of the creative team, and if they like a book, they'll spend over what the normal amount would be if they published it in physical. It's even more interesting that you can download an entire series and you just have it on your devices. No subscription fees, no hidden cost, you just own the book. Well, at least until AI becomes sentient and then they realize that they need to take out humanity, leading to Judgment Day. But hey, at least you can read comics until then. Anyway, The Private Eye was a success for the publisher, and they started reaching out to other creators, allowing for them to also publish work in this model. If you aren't familiar with Ed Brubaker, first off, L plus ratio, but also he's one of the biggest names in indie comics of the modern era. Originally, he rose to prominence writing books at DC like Catwoman, Gotham Central, and even Batman. And then he moved over to Marvel Comics, where he told the most popular Captain America comics in the modern age and a lackluster Daredevil story. Don't get mad at me. I'm just saying that while his run has some good moments, it never really gets outside of the shadow of Brian Michael Bendis's run. After being scorned by the Big Two, and specifically only receiving $5,000 from Marvel after The Winter Soldier was adapted into the MCU, he left and went to Image Comics to do creator-owned work. While working over at Image Comics, he would have consistent success with longtime collaborator Sean Phillips. They would tell crime noir stories that didn't acquiesce to the broad market appeal. The team found viability being able to tell the stories that they want to tell and not being beholden to corporate synergy. Marcos Martin is not a stranger to the Big Two, with him providing some of the most stylized pencils for Amazing Spider-Man during Big Time and post Brand New Day, Mark Waid's Daredevil, and for Doctor Strange The Oath alongside Brian K. Vaughan. In the modern day, he is predominantly just working for creator-owned publishers, and occasionally he returns to the Big Two for minor freelance work. As Brubaker describes it, Martin reached out to him and he jumped at the opportunity to formulate this book. Their demonstration of being able to contort styles to the other's sensibilities is a testament to the creative team's ability. The reader is never really sure what they're expecting to get, and that's something that the creative team really plays into with this book. This provides for the creative team to subvert expectations and play against stereotypes of what the audience is expecting to see in their work. The story introduces us to Friday Fitzhugh, who returns to her hometown of Kings Hill on Christmas break from college. We're given the insight that Friday was a part of a dynamic duo of kid detectives alongside Lancelot Jones. It's shown that Friday and Lance are somewhat estranged since Friday left for college, leaving him behind. Once she arrives to Kings Hill, she's immediately swept into another investigation. But as time goes on, she becomes increasingly frustrated with Lance as he tries to avoid acknowledging their time apart and what happened just before she left. While this tension is an ongoing plotline, the mystery is our primary focus. They track down a previous antagonist named Wilson Weasel Wadsworth, but something isn't right. He's not acting like the typical rich kid that owns the ski slopes archetype, but instead he's almost feral and muttering something about a prophecy. He wields this ancient dagger that's later revealed to have supernatural properties. Friday and Lance immediately revert back to their old ways, assuming the partnership of their youth and dispatching Weasel. The prophecy, of course, then comes to a head when the supernatural elements of the story start overtaking the town, and this leads to the supposed death of Lance. After he's thought dead, it's up to Friday to unravel the mystery of what led to Lance's death, tracing the clues that he left behind and seeing how this plays a role in this supernatural invasion. At first glance, the setup seems to be relatively straightforward, an analog for so many YA kid detectives within literature has to return to her hometown to solve a mystery that's more important than ever before. And in reality, it's emphasizing the saying, "You can never go home again." Ed Brubaker describes the series as, it's about that passing from youth to adulthood, but seen through the eyes of a teen detective, where the world she grew up in is suddenly darker and deadlier and scarier than we or she expect it to be. It's about coming home from Christmas that first year away and how small your hometown feels, and how all your friends seem stuck in the past and don't see that you've changed. Man, you like cooler music now, and smoke, and you went to a punk show. While there's an ongoing threat of Lovecraftian creatures, the story somehow also makes sure that you're just as invested in Friday's journey of self-discovery. She's grown to be increasingly antagonistic to the role of a sidekick, and she struggles to find what her identity is outside of her dynamic duo partnership. And at the same time, she deals with the turmoil of early adulthood. There's a longing relationship that Friday has with her hometown. She moved away and went to college, but when she comes back, it's like nothing changed. Kings Hill really embodies the warm embrace of nostalgia, and upon her arrival, she's unable to showcase any slight change. After the death of Lance, she spirals and attempts to pick up the pieces of her identity, and with this, it illustrates the many stages of grief. How can she possibly move forward and find who she is if a piece of her is now missing? I found myself enthralled with the mystery that Friday's unraveling, and as the story progressed, so too did my excitement. The creative team was able to include a lot of the tropes that you expect from this genre, but it also provided an additional flair that kept me on the edge of my seat, waiting for the next grand reveal. Something that Brubaker pointed out while he was talking about the series is that every generation has their own cultural touchstone with the genre, whether they know it or not. For his generation, he referenced Harriet the Spy, the Hardy Boys, and Encyclopedia Brown. For later generations, he spoke about the Mystery Gang from Scooby-Doo being a predominant influence for so many to get an introduction to the genre. By incorporating the use of these elements and somehow revitalizing it to show through the lens of what if these characters grew up, the narrative makes it approachable for audiences that have a tangential familiarity with the genre. The true brilliance of the series is the parallels between Friday's investigation and her also finding her independence. So often is the case that the male is typically not only the brawn, but the brains as well. I think that Lance was portrayed to have some of the traits to be shown to be on the autistic spectrum. Meanwhile, Friday is the only person that actually understands him. She takes on the mannerisms of being his protector while he's the brains of the operation. It's a refreshing take on tired tropes of gender roles and explores how these characters completely complete the other. Brubaker and Martine made sure to portray their relationship as undefined, allowing for the reader to first assume that it's romantic, only to find out that neither character really is trying to find intimacy in the other, but instead the platonic ideal of soulmates. Sometimes we don't need the endless will they, won't they, because as evidenced in the series, characters discovering their own worth is more valuable than the relationships that they're in. As spoken about previously, Ed Brubaker is known to write crime noir stories, but this book seemingly brings out a different side of him. He's spoken in multiple interviews talking about his adoration for YA detective stories, stating that he always wanted to tell stories within this genre, but never had the opportunity. This becomes more apparent as Ed Brubaker's grittiness is tempered with Marcos Martin's illustrations. The two work in harmony to give life to these characters beyond the page. Marcos is able to depict this small, quiet New England town with the same level of artistry that he does with Lovecraftian creatures. Marcos Martin spoke about the visual illustration of depicting the series by stating, "The first thing that came to mind was the illustration style from the 60s and 70s, something that would visually suggest or evoke that time period in the reader's mind while still feeling modern. That included the choice of fonts for the logo and credits too, for example. Also, Ed was very clear when pitching me the story that he wanted a mixture of Lovecraft's New England and Edward Gorey. Luckily, that fell exactly in my line for what I was hoping to go for stylistically in my newest project. I felt the mood of the story lent itself to be more of cross-hatching approach, a technique I had never really looked into and which can also be associated with the beginning of the 20th century, the same period of Lovecraft's stories. So yes, I was hoping to achieve a combination of early century Gothic and the gritty 70s. The greatest example of their collaborative excellence is the ability to be malleable within scenes. Instead of just having Brubaker provide a script and Martine using that as a mandate, Marcos would expand in areas that he felt needed to be accentuated for emotional tone, and Brubaker would fill out the script accordingly. At the end of the day, comics are a visual medium, so ensuring that the emotion is able to reverberate, the writer must be malleable to serve what's best for the story. There's a deceptive simplicity within Friday, at first lulling the reader into the comfortability that they know what to expect, but it's when the story progresses that the layers are revealed. Every character is given unique characterization, and they're able to be rendered with this unflinching vulnerability to their emotional core. So often was the case that I would find myself witnessing a character have a visceral reaction, and it provided for me to visualize their thought process in the moment. It's a perfect blend of character acting and also panel-to-panel storytelling. The utilization of flat coloring is definitely a benefit for the series, and not distracting the reader with flashiness, but instead making them focus on each character interaction. Onomatopoeia plays a crucial role in the reader's experience. It allows for the reader to be invested, whether it's a twig that breaks in the dark woods in the middle of the night, or showcasing the motion in altercations. Okay, so I spent enough time talking about everything that I love about the series, but it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, the ending. I'm going to talk about spoilers now, so if you haven't read the book and want to, this is your time to stop. Or you can keep watching. I'm not your mother, I can't control what you do. So at the end of the story, there's this exponential buildup to a final confrontation with the White Lady. Every issue previously had established the notion that she was going to overtake King's Hill and then beyond. So we enter the final confrontation with this in mind, knowing of the escalation of peril that our characters are in. However, when the White Lady is presented with the remains of of her husband, she just stops. No final showdown, no last-ditch effort to save the lives that are hanging in the balance. It's just a problem and then a solution. Now, I've been stewing on this for a few days, trying to collect my thoughts and see how I really feel about this ending. I've been trying to wrap my head around if this is a satisfying conclusion to the series and formulate all of my thoughts into one succinct ending explanation. So here we go. I believe that the White Lady's motivations are the realistic endpoint to where grief can take us. Obviously, we can't spend 100 years on a revenge plot and also slowly steal the children and then replace them with beings of our own. Yeah, this book gets weird. But instead, it's the lengths that we're willing to go to get our own version of revenge. In our quest to avenge the ones that we love, it never makes us whole. And this is a direct parallel for the journey that Friday takes trying to solve Lance's murder. When the White Lady receives the remains of her husband, she becomes whole. She casts aside her desire for conquest, instead submitting to her humanity. The White Lady's reconciliation of her emotions is sudden. However, it's the first instance of humanity treating her with empathy. Perhaps it's a means to convey how one small gesture can mean so much to another person, or that we live in a world of nuance and we require empathy to understand one another. Honestly, I'm not sure if that explanation is 100% satisfying to me, but I needed to just express my feelings about that ending and hopefully start a dialogue. After all, stories are up for interpretation, and I'm interested in the comments from the people that like this ending and see what they have to say. Okay, if I can, I just want to express my gratitude for everybody that's been following me on this journey for making videos. During this year, I just decided that I needed some sort of creative outlet, and I decided that videos would be the best option. I wanted to have an outlet where I can just talk about the comics that I love and hopefully provide some bit of nuance and further analysis that's beyond a thread on Twitter. Since I began in June, I've been able to collaborate with some of the content creators that I've adored for a long time as a fan, and also these people are the ones that influenced me to interact with the medium beyond the surface level. Really, I just wanted to be additive and just speak about comics in the long form. I honestly still can't believe that people want to hear me talk about comics, and I can't believe that that led me to interview one of my favorite writers in the modern day. I mean, I got to talk to Rom V about New Gods, and then I got to read issue 1 early. If you would have told me that I'd be doing this a year ago, I probably would have had an aneurysm, maybe because of the time travel aspect, but then also that I would be able to do that. So genuinely, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you stick around to see what's to come. I also hope you have a happy holidays, and I'll see you in the new year. And don't forget, go read some comics. Or elves. Get it? Like Santa's elf.